When Alex Acosta, he was asked by the press, well, why didn't you go harder on Epstein? Why did you let him go? He said, I was told to back off Epstein because he belonged to intelligence. Is a 1961 memo from Arthur Schlesinger, senior advisor at the White House to JFK, and it was called CIA Reorganization. It was a 15-page memo about why JFK had to confront the rogue CIA, how they had gone rogue, how they had usurped the foreign policy making function of the State Department. And it goes through very specific numbers about how deeply the CIA had penetrated both our own organizations and foreign governments. And what Schlesinger says to JFK in the memo is that about 75% of everyone who works in the State Department's political section are actually CIA employees or CIA agents working under State Department cover. If you're a company like BlackRock and you have an equity investment in basically every company, then you do your investing on the basis of these macroeconomic forecasts that depend heavily on what the US government is going to do to an industry or to a region. It's the ultimate form of insider trading.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well. All is very good, very blessed on this end. As always, my friends, I give all the praise, honor, glory, and thanksgiving to our God for that. I have a very special guest today. His name is Mike Benz. You might have heard about him. He's been on a number of podcasts lately. Very, very smart guy. Let me read a little bit about him. He is now the director of the Foundation for Freedom Online. That's his company. He's a former State Department official with responsibilities in formulating and negotiating U.S. foreign policy on international communications and information technology matters. He's a very, very smart guy. He's really into censorship. He don't want it. He don't want people to be shut down. He wants freedom of speech, and he's kind of a safeguard for that internationally. He knows a lot about the deep state. He knows a lot about the international workings of government. He's going to tell us some things that I think are really going to surprise us. Maybe not. He's not a conspiracy theorist. This guy, he has knowledge. He knows his stuff. He speaks very intelligently, and I'm excited to talk about him. And as always, you know, I know a lot of people disagree with some of my guests and they say things that, you know, they don't believe it's true or whatever. Hey, it's up to you to judge his credibility. I think he's a very credible guy, and I think he's going to come across that way. He has in previous interviews. He's obviously very, very smart and very knowledgeable. He worked for the State Department. He knows what's going on, people. So let's listen to him. We enjoy bringing you guests like this, you know, with all the goings on in the world. We need to hear from intelligent people that are in the know and really can give us insight as to what's going on. So with no further delay, very special guest, Mike Benz.
I've been looking forward to this conversation. I think that a lot of these issues and things that you've dealt with your whole life are alive and well and playing a significant role in politics today. And we're sort of running up against it, I think, in the Trump admin in everything from domestic policy to foreign policy.
Well, Mike, you know, that's a good place to start because recently, within the last year and a half, I wrote a book. I'll give you a little background. I had written a business book, and HarperCollins was my publisher. And then they told me I owed them another book, and they said, we want you to write a political book. They said, do you have a title? I said, oh, easily, Mafia Democracy. And they said, well, we love the title. So they give me an advance. I go home, I start writing the book, and I write 4 chapters on it. And I turned to my wife at one point and I said, why am I doing this? I said, nobody's bothering me now. Nobody's chasing me. It's a peaceful time in my life. I said, people are going to get mad because I'm talking about the system of government, not, you know, left, right, or anything else. So I thought about it and I went back to the publisher. I gave him the money back and I said, I'm not going to write this book. I said, there's no need for me to do it. Cut to 2.5 years ago, during the Biden administration, I said, you know what? I have to write this book. I said, people got to see what's going on here. So I wrote it and I have it now. And, you know, I'm going to be honest, Mike, you know, I was on the street. We spent plenty of time with politicians. We did their bidding. They were close to us because I always say, what do politicians want? They want 2 things. They want votes and they want money. And we were able to supply both. So we got friendly with them. But I've never seen the level of, I have to call it corruption, that we've witnessed in this past couple of years. It's so right out there. It's just there for everybody to see. So The way I want to start this is letting my viewer knows what your background is. If you can get into that and tell us what you do now, and then we can get into the whole conversation.
Yeah, I started my career as a corporate lawyer. I was in New York for about 8 years working at a major law firm, and I got sort of sucked into the 2016 election cycle with Donald Trump running the first time. I took a really keen interest in the internet censorship issues that were happening at the time. Free speech had always been a big part of my life. Did a lot of writing. I did a lot of just sort of expression type stuff that I thought coming of age when the internet sort of first came online in my generation, it was totally life changing to feel like you could do anything on the internet. It was a real democracy of ideas. And when I saw that get shut down during that campaign season in 2016, I tried to investigate, well, why is this happening? Who's doing it? And I found the answers that were out there were totally insufficient. A lot of people were blaming the social media companies themselves. They were blaming Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey, the first guy at Twitter. And then I came across some documents that really changed my life. I came across these DARPA documents from the U.S. military around control over the information space by leveraging AI technology to scan and ban keywords, and how this could be used to control, political movements, to be able to have a rapid response to trending narratives, to fight counterinsurgency overseas. And then I said, well, God, so the military and the intelligence community, by extension, are pushing this. How deep does this rabbit hole go, so to speak? And then it really just sucked me in. I started writing a book on it, a documentary about it. It really became my monomaniacal life passion. Then just through the process of talking about that and it sort of taking over my life, I ended up joining the White House. I was a White House speechwriter, and I did sort of a tech policy advisory from help from my sort of lawyer days. And then from there, I went to the State Department. I ran the cyber portfolio for the State Department in the Economic Affairs Bureau. And then several years ago, I started my foundation, Foundation for Freedom Online, which is about internet free speech. And then just the last thing I'll say on that for your audience is what I found is that the free speech issue is actually a gateway to all these other meta issues around corruption, around foreign policy, around what I called the blob. It's not my term. It was actually Obama's Deputy National Security Advisor who coined it. But really this sort of foreign policy establishment to control international affairs that was threatened by Trump's foreign policy and then used its sort of domestic arm to wipe him out through Russiagate, impeachments, and lawfare.
My friends, if you enjoyed this video, I'm going to give you an opportunity to become my partner in business. Franzese Wine experiencing tremendous growth over the past couple of years, and we're going to experience even further growth in the next few years. You're going to have an opportunity to be my partner because you've been supporting me, you've been my fan base, and I want to share this with you. So go to invest.franzesewine.com, and offer you shouldn't refuse. Wow, Mike. So let me ask you a question. I know you've talked about influence operations, shadow networks. I mean, are you basically saying, how does the U.S. government operate? I mean, do they operate? To me, there's so many similarities between a mob family and the way the government operates. Am I off track or off base on this, or would you say that I'm on target?
I think you're exactly on target. I think it's hard to find a presidential candidate in the past, I don't know, 70 years, who doesn't have some mob, connections, whether directly or very close indirectly. I mean, whether you're talking about, I've heard you talk about with JFK, into the, there's a book called Super Mob that goes into, Ronald Reagan. The Bush family seems to be completely tethered to organized crime. The Clintons, Obama and the Chicago boys, the Pritzker family and their strange links around Obama, And even Trump's involvement in Atlantic City and Las Vegas and the hotel business, you really can't, I think, run away from the role of some element of organized crime in your path to a senior role in U.S. politics. And along those lines, one of the things I was really interested to get your take on and hear you go off on, frankly, just whatever you want to say on it, is I've been intensely interested in the role of unions in U.S. politics. And I think they're one of those factors that folks in MAGA world tend not to think about all that much. But when a lot of my job involves tracing the intelligence links to various issues to try to adjust government policy to zero out places that the intelligence community shouldn't be, that they're not authorized to be. And when you start talking about the mafia and organized crime, you see their links to unions pop up everywhere. And I've heard you talk about this in the JFK files talks that you've done about the really early alliance between the CIA and the mafia, really in the run up to World War II, when Mussolini was posing a threat to the Italian mafia, and we were waging a war against Italy, and so there was a common enemy, so to speak. And there are great books out there: The CIA's Organized Crime by Doug Valentine, Operation Gladio, The CIA, the Mafia, and the Vatican by Paul Williams, and many others that go through this enduring role that's existed between intelligence and the mob all throughout the Cold War, because of the threat that left-wing Marxist movements posed, and sort of the street muscle and union labor and organization of organized crime was a helpful bulwark during the Cold War. But I think that this goes, well beyond just the Italian mafia, or what we see in Chicago and New York and Miami. We see it also all around the world. I think that these links exist with our role with organized crime factions in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Colombia, in Peru, in Ecuador, in Brazil. This really appears to be a sort of check the box checklist item for the intelligence community in every region we operate, to establish links with elements of organized crime who are pushing a political candidate or a regulatory regime that is favorable for U.S. businesses, which is why I think what Trump is doing right now with designating drug cartels as terrorist groups is something that was never done before, because I think all the other presidents have come in effectively promoting that for
Yeah,
self-serving
and
reasons.
no, Mike, you really hit it on the head. I'll give you a real example. I just did a video. I've been doing videos. I have a tapestry behind me with the people that I consider the 50 most prominent, we'll call it that, mob guys in the last 100 years here in the United States. And, I have to say, some people get upset. They say, Michael, you're glorifying a lifestyle. And I said, no, I'm not. But you can't take away the fact that the mafia was deeply involved in the history of the United States, both politically and otherwise. And, you take a person like Carlos Marcello in Louisiana, out of New Orleans. He basically controlled that state. He had such influence over the unions, over the gambling operations. He had friends with politicians. He had tremendous influence. Same in Chicago with Anthony Accardo, and same in New York to a large degree. We had, 5 different families there. I had relationships with a very powerful Democratic leader at the time. He was the one that got me licenses for all of the, the gas operation that I had. I couldn't get them on my own. We had to be licensed in order to wholesale gas. So we had a tremendous amount of influence. Unions, we control the unions in the country. If you control the unions, you control the country in a big way, because you have powerful voting bloc, and you have huge amount of money in all the pension funds. And so politicians were drawn to that, and we were able to get influence, and they in turn were able to use us to get their own influence. So, and I can speak to it obviously firsthand for the United States, but I think it's true all around the world. And I think you just hit the nail on the head with the cartels finally being designated, a terrorist outfit because of the influence that they have. Mike, when you have that much money and you have manpower, you have influence, regardless of what side of the law you are in. And so, you're right with that in respect to that. We had a tremendous amount of influence. But let me ask you this. We hear about the deep state. We hear about that all the time, but nobody can really identify it. Who is this deep state? Who is this shadow government that's really controlling, so much of what goes on here in the United States? And my other thing with that, if Trump is finally being transparent and finally wants to bring America to where it should be with accountability to its citizens, then like him or not, he's on the right path because there's been so much going on with this shadow government that we don't know about. And you probably uncovered a lot of it, with the censorship throughout, the prior 4 years and everything that's going on. But who is this deep state? Who are they? Who are they comprised of? Without mentioning maybe specific names, if you don't have that, what is the body that is this deep state?
Yeah, and I can give specific names, but I like to think of it as a blob. This was this movie from the 1950s around this sort of gelatinous monster that is, it's unstoppable. It's sort of slow moving, but it just absorbs everything in its path, and it really has three layers to it in the US government. There is the sort of deep inside part of the government, which comprises the State Department, the Pentagon, the intelligence community, and in between them is USAID. And then you have on top of that, so that's government policy for international affairs that the American, I think it's important to draw a dividing line between the American empire and the American homeland. And this sort of gets to the mafia role in this, in my view, because a lot of the justification for making contact with the mob and for working with the international branches of the AFL-CIO and other large unions and the CI's role in the union world was because we were building an American empire during the 20th century. And we needed to control the organized labor. We needed to control the internal politics. And so we reached out to the AFL-CIO's international branches. They're the largest union in the U.S., and as well as hundreds of other unions. The CIA actually created dozens of union branches, as well as working with the existing ones. The JFK files actually have amazing factoids on this that just came out about a month and a half ago. But you have this inner side, which is the government agencies. And I emphasize the role of the State Department, the Pentagon, and the intelligence community, because those are really the big budget agencies that have a tremendous amount of power. Now, of course, you have the Justice Department that's sort of attached to that. But on top of that government layer, you have what I call the donor drafter class. And these are the hedge funds, the private equity funds, and the multinational companies who both donate to politicians or they co-invest in government initiatives around the world, and then they draft off of the government policies. So, for example, if we're going to war in Syria and we want the oil, you're going to have oil companies who are going to donate to the politicians who want to promote that war. But then their own oil companies will draft off of the battering ram of the Pentagon, opening up those oil supplies, of the State Department putting sanctions on a country and squeezing its government to put a more pro-Western oil government in place there, and will have a CIA that will work to back channel with all the relevant groups in the country in order to make that regime change happen. So they draft off of government policy in the same way that somebody in the second slot in a bike race drafts off the person cutting the wind. So the government agencies cut the wind, and the donors and drafters profit off of that. And then the third layer is that underside right underneath the government agency level, which are the NGOs and civil society organizations and groups like the unions who are funded by the U.S. government, who are sort of assets of the U.S. government for many of these operations, who themselves profit from government grants, government contracts, government protection. And so you have this sort of corporate financial overlayer. You have this sort of giant tentacle spread civil society layer, and then you've got the government layer in the middle. And that's really the action that many people see play out in Washington. And they don't really understand the news when they see it because they get a very retail version of events because they're not aware of either the top or the bottom layers.
So this is really a very complicated, intricate system. Let me ask you this, because I just thought of this. You know, Trump coming into office in 2016, he's not a career politician, obviously a successful businessman. He knows his way around the unions and all of that. I know that personally. But he comes into office in 2016, most powerful guy maybe in the world, but he doesn't know all of this. I mean, this is kind of on the job training for him to really understand the system and how it really works and what's going on behind the scenes.
Completely. I mean, I saw that firsthand when I was in the White House. The Trump administration was green, and the fact is everybody in the system knew it. In fact, our FBI director, when Trump took office, James Comey, famously said that he was only able to entrap General Flynn by having two FBI agents get him for a voluntary interview. Those agents wrote on a napkin, it came out, what is the purpose of this meeting? Is it to get him fired, or is it to get him to perjure himself? I mean, they literally wrote that to the FBI director. They were unclear. They knew the operation was to get Trump's high level military and intelligence advisor to take him out, but they didn't know why they were doing it. Are we trying to set him up for a crime, or do we just want to create a political scandal where he gets fired? And Comey said he would never have tried something like that with Hillary Clinton, who had been around D.C. politics forever, between Bill Clinton in the 90s as an 8-year president and her time in the Senate and her time as the Secretary of State. But Trump didn't know, neither did all of Trump world. And again, a lot of this is because of the international side of what makes America run. People look at their own local cities or their own local towns, and they don't realize that their oil is coming from, partnerships with Saudi Arabia. They don't realize that their pencils are made because of gum trees in Malaysia and graphite mines in South America. Someone has to manipulate events in all those foreign countries in order to keep American business in line. And that is where you get this sort of deep state blob apparatus. But, I'm actually fascinated by that backstory about the picture on, behind you, because this was the justification, and I think remains the justification, for the CIA involvement in organized crime and the CIA involvement in unions and in mob organizations is a sort of, the justification is U.S. national security. The justification is there's sort of a patriotic duty. And there's an interesting thought experiment. If the mob had not existed, would we have won the Cold War? Would we have been able to break up the striking dock workers in Marseille in France? Would we have been able to run guns and ammunition to folks taking on the left-wing Marxists, liberation theology folks in South America? Would we have been able to resist communist influence in Central and Eastern Europe? The answer to that may be no. And so it is a complicated picture. The problem is, if you want to go there and have that be U.S. policy, as it's been for 100 years now, at a certain point, the lies begin to build to such a big extent that you've built an American empire, but you've built an empire of lies. And in order to maintain those lies, you need a system of censorship, and you need constant cloak and dagger operations in order to stop people from accessing any inroad into the truth, any window into it. And so everything becomes a secret. Everything becomes overclassified. Everything becomes, a subject to a system of censorship or political prosecution if you talk about something. And so as we're unwinding that right now, I think it is important to get all this history out there. And can I ask, I don't know if you're able to talk about specific union groups, but did
Sure.
you ever run into the AFL-CIO when you were, in your
Oh,
sort of.
absolutely. Yeah, I dealt with a lot of the unions, and I controlled a couple of bartenders and waitresses union, and also a high security union I had. We were actually we had the security around all of 9 nuclear power plants in the United States. And the law at that time, the security guards, when a nuclear power plant closed down, you had to have security around it for 100 years. So we just had our people out there for 100 years watching them, and I controlled that. And it was an important, union. Same with the bartenders and waitresses. And then I dealt with all of the unions on various construction projects that we had. So, we were able to, if I didn't have, contact in the union, one of the other families did, and we were able to work deals out so that everybody earned some money and we controlled the job. That's why I told people, people always saying, well, Trump had mob connections. I said, well, so did every major developer in New York. You weren't going to get anything done unless you cooperated with the unions. We weren't going to let you build anything. So from Helmsley to Gutterman to Trump, they all had to deal with us. So the answer to that is yes. And the same with politicians. They had to deal with us in some way, shape, or form. I wanted to ask you something, Mike. You think Trump knows the system now that this is his second time around?
I think that he knows it about 100 times better, which is still not close to all the way there, but it's enough to be able to identify threats from decently far away. I mean, the issue in Trump 1.0 is he was constantly getting surprised by the depravity of how far they were willing to go. He didn't really know all the agencies and what they really did, what they said they did versus what they actually did. A great example of this is USAID, who is, in my view, a mob shop that simply you can call it the Foggy Bottom Mafia if you want. They're simply a mafia out of D.C. Now, they call themselves a humanitarian NGO funding group that exists for two purposes: to promote human rights and promote economic development around the world, but to do so in a way that advances U.S. interests. And so what they do is they get everybody on payroll. They infiltrate all the institutions of civil society. They fund universities, hospital systems, union groups, lawyers, judges, scholars, media organizations. And so you get to a point where you have this sort of, everything that you're looking at in a country, you think it's, these are just organizations that are just there on their own, but they're really serving two masters. And that same network was weaponized to the tune of billions of dollars inward against Trump, because Trump was running on a foreign policy that threatened that USAID network. And so they simply took those tens of thousands of organizations, all the NGOs, all the union groups they funded, all the university centers and the professors and the judges and the lawyers and the media outlets, and they simply ran a Get Trump operation with that very same network. I was asked when I was at the White House, when I was doing a speech for Trump, to look up JFK's quotes about his generals. And I remember thinking at the time, holy crap, this is, are they going to try, does Trump think that his generals are going to try to kill him? Or at the very least, that they're betraying him and that he sees himself as a JFK figure under assault by his own government? But the fact is now we're seeing these mass layoffs. USAID is set to go extinct on July 1 of this year. The State Department's going through a massive reorganization. 132 agencies, sub-agencies are being cleaved out of there. DOJ has done a tremendous job of rooting out corruption. There's massive reforms at the Department of Education, which of course the teachers' unions are trying to stop with everything they can. And when bad people are identified who don't observe the chain of command, they're getting fired immediately, which is just completely different. But it's also, just one last thing is, we have a different set of cards than we did the first time. When Trump got in, he had no allies in Congress. So if he wanted to get a budget done, he had to do favors for the system. He was not the system. George Bush, when he was president, both senior and junior were the system. The Clintons were the system when they got in. Obama, Biden, they were the system when they got in. Everybody in their own party supported them, and half of the people from the other party were fine with it. Trump had none of that. But in the past 10 years, he has built a very powerful coalition. And so because of that, he doesn't have to do as many favors for them in order to get his agenda done, because they're naturally on side. So that has changed the political calculus. Also, I believe the onboarding of allies like Elon Musk and of folks from the tech community and other groups. We have a much bigger coalition, and so we're better armed to defend ourselves against many of these internal system attacks. It's not perfect, but 100 times better than it was.
Oh, Mike, that's so informative. You know, when you talk about USAID, from my perspective, from a street perspective, seeing what Doge uncovered about it, I look at it as two things. Number one, it was a vehicle used to impose the agenda of those in power on the rest of the world so that they can control the rest of the world and have them thinking the way they think. You know, number one. Number two, I saw it as a huge money laundering operation. That's what it looked like to me, with all this crazy amount of money going to you know that money is being kicked back. I don't care what anybody says, 100%. So certain people in government got very wealthy with that, or the people that were involved in this, they got wealthy. You know, unbelievable. And like I said, with USAID, I've never seen the length of corruption. I mean, even I was surprised. And I grew up with this, and I lived with it 20 years on the street. I said, wow, these people just don't care anymore. This is just right out in the open what they're doing. And honestly too, I worry about Trump because, listen, I've said this in the past. The FBI, the Department of Justice, they wanted to go against the mob here in America. We make headlines. We're the best group to come after because we're the flashiest. We're the most romanticized. We make all the headlines. We may not even be that dangerous because we're not out killing people in the streets. The things that we're doing in a big way and not that harmful to society. People will probably come back at me for that. And yeah, well, people die. Yeah, but normally our own people that die and we kill each other, and that's not good, but that's what happens. That's the reality of it. But I don't think the CIA wants the mob to go down because they've used us several times in the past and they'll continue using us. And the fact that they're in, not a branch, but they're involved in government doesn't mean anything. The CIA will work with anybody to get their goals accomplished. So, and you're right, we did have a tremendous impact in World War II. It was Luciano that allowed the Allies to land in Sicily. We absolutely opened up and protected the docks. There's no question about it. Another time that they came to us, fact, without a doubt, is when they tried to, or they wanted to assassinate, what's his name, in Cuba,
Yeah, Castro.
Castro in Cuba. It didn't work, but they did come to us. And then, a guy from our family, Greg Scarpa, they used him in a civil rights matter to go down and find a couple of guys that were involved with the Ku Klux Klan at that time. So they've come to us a number of times. Mike, I have said this. I don't get anything out of talking about this, even with the Kennedy thing that I want to get into with you. I've heard these things from the right people all my life. They don't brag about things like this. This is conversation that were talked about on a high level. And these are things that I heard that I believe to be true. There's no reason for those people to say something, even if I wasn't personally involved in it. I know that it came from the right people, the involvement that we had in some of these things that I just mentioned, without a doubt. But I want to move on to the whole Epstein matter. I did something recently on that because this latest victim, that committed
Virginia,
suicide,
Jeffrey,
Jeffrey,
yeah.
yeah. It's sickening to me that we don't have accountability, that this list is probably never going to be, really made public. Who knows how it's going to be redacted and whose names are going to appear and whose not names are going to appear. I mean, there's so many things that are being covered up that the American people don't know. I've been very vocal about it lately, especially about this whole Doge thing. I mean, this is something crazy. I said, the only way you bring these people to the table, if everybody got up and said, hey, we're not paying our taxes until you're accountable to us on everything that's going on, where all this money is being spent. There's no way for us really to put pressure on people to find accountability. What's your thoughts on that with Epstein? I will tell you this before you answer that. I was on the exact same tier, in the exact same cell block that Epstein was. There's no way, in my estimation, that guy committed suicide. No way. Cameras don't go out all at once. People don't stop walking the tier. I mean, there was times there, the toilet is right there in the open. You don't even want to go to the toilet because people are going back and forth all the time. And there's no method in there to commit suicide, to hang yourself like he did. You couldn't do it. You just couldn't
Yeah,
do it. So,
yeah.
Starting with that, um, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to be getting transparency on Epstein anytime soon. I think it's possible that in the long run we will. I don't know how long that run will be, whether that's a year from now, 2 years from now, or 60 years from now, like we're starting to finally get these JFK declassifications. The fact is the Epstein case is very, very, very recent, and the people involved are all alive and well, and many of them in very powerful positions in the U.S. government and internationally. So it's not like the JFK situation where, everyone is dead or has been dead for 20, 30 years in terms of playing senior roles in the intelligence layer of that, or the mafia layer of that, or internationally, you name it. And Trump is definitely on to the Epstein situation. I just posted this the other day. In February 2015, when Trump was beginning his run for the presidency the first time, he gave a talk, I believe it was at CPAC, where he was asked his thoughts on Bill Clinton. And he says, well, Bill Clinton, he's a nice guy, but I think he's going to have some problems with this Jeffrey Epstein island. And the crowd sort of let out a gasp that Trump 10 years ago now, over 10 years ago, was saying that Bill Clinton was going to go down in the Epstein scandal. And the fact is this did happen under his watch. It was in 2019. It happened under his own Justice Department. Bill Barr was the head of the Justice Department when Epstein died in prison. I totally agree with your analysis. There's no way both security cameras glitch out, both security guards fall asleep, the visitor log page is ripped out of the notebook. And who was the head of the Justice Department at the time that happened under? It was Bill Barr. Bill
Right.
Barr was the CIA's mop-up man. He told his high school guidance counselor, this is in his own autobiography, that his dream job was to run the CIA. His first job was working for the CIA. His first 7 years of his career he spent at the CIA. He went to night law school while he was at the CIA, basically worked through law school with the CIA. His first job out of law school was protecting the CIA from the Iran-Contra investigation when the CIA was perceived to have gone rogue, to work in tandem with Santos Traficante and the whole Tampa and Louisiana and network and Miami in order to run guns to the Nicaraguan Contras and to work with all of the different paramilitary groups that needed guns and laundered money all over Operation Condor and Iran-Contra there. When Congress tried to investigate the CIA, it was Bill Barr. Literally, the Washington Post described him as the mop-up man, the CIA's mop-up man to block congressional inquiry into Iran-Contra. He then becomes the head of the Justice Department twice, the second time under Trump. And not only that, Bill Barr's father, Donald Barr, was the mentor to Jeffrey Epstein. He was literally, was a student of Bill Barr's dad at the same high school. So, I mean, there's the family connection, there's the intelligence connection. Of course, Jeffrey Epstein, when Alex Acosta, who was the nominee for the Secretary of Labor, again, the labor division is unions. That's a big, the Department of Labor spends hundreds of millions of dollars through its international affairs branch to fund the international wings of unions, like the AFL-CIO, and I can go through a million examples of that. But the fact is, when Alex Acosta was asked, why did you, because he was the prosecutor, he was the Epstein prosecutor in the initial case where Epstein was, given a wrist slap and let off. And he was asked by the press, well, why didn't you go harder on Epstein? Why did you let him go? Because, and Acosta felt like he needed to answer this question because he had a Senate confirmation hearing coming up and didn't want the scandal hanging over him. He said, I was told to back off Epstein because he belonged to intelligence. And so you have, now that is an obvious thing to anyone who's studied the Epstein issue. Jeffrey Epstein was involved in arms trafficking during Iran-Contra. He negotiated the resettlement of Southern Air Transport from Mena, Arkansas, which was the main CIA air base under Bill Clinton in Arkansas during Iran-Contra, where they were running the cocaine from the Contras to the U.S. to retail it to cash, to buy guns, to send the guns back to the Contras. Jeffrey Epstein negotiated the resettlement of Southern Air Transport, the CIA proprietary airline, directly to Columbus, Ohio, which was the city controlled in large part by his main sponsor, Les Wexner. Les Wexner was the guy who gave him the multi-million-dollar mansion in New York, and who gave Epstein power of attorney over his entire financial empire. The fact is Epstein has been running through these CIA networks for 40 years, but there's also all the international networks. We don't know, for example, whether or not he belonged to intelligence meant just U.S. intelligence, although there absolutely was U.S. intelligence, but there could also be a role of Israeli intelligence. There could be a role of UK, British intelligence. There could be a role of Saudi intelligence, because he was working with Adnan Khashoggi in Saudi Arabia. He was working with, he appeared to have deep ties to the royal family in the UK, and of course appears to have links to many aspects of Israeli intelligence. So, part of the reason that I think the Epstein case is too big to fail is because it's not just about embarrassing our own intelligence capacities, although I think the Trump administration has an interest in exposing those as part of the reforms, but there may be higher level talks happening at the international layer that Trump wants to maintain an alliance with, that are putting pressure on the Justice Department or putting pressure on various levels of the White House to not disclose them. And if that's the case, I don't think we're getting transparency anytime soon. And I don't think they'd tell us.
Yeah, I think you just nailed it. That's been my feeling all along, because you got Trump, you got Bondi, you got Patel. They're running this thing. If they can't get it done, then somebody must be saying, hey, Donald, back off. You want relationships here? This is not something that can come out right now. I think that has to be the case. I think you just hit it right on the head. There's always a question, where did Epstein make all his money? Nobody really knows. And I think you just described it. All these relationships that he has. I have thought all along that he was a CIA operative. I'll call it, because I don't know what other term to use. But you've even expanded that. It could be other agencies around the world that he was working covertly with all the while. Let me ask you this. And in a case like that, as compared to what would happen on the street, if they thought this guy was going to finally open up because he doesn't want to face prison time, well, they're going to eliminate him. End of story. That's it. It's going to be done. That's so mob-like. Let me ask you, Ghislaine Maxwell. I don't know what information she knew, how much Epstein really confided in her, but I'm sure she's seen very powerful people come through. People said, well, why didn't she get killed? Or why didn't they try to do something with her? And I said, listen, maybe they went to her and said, listen, you saw what happened to Epstein. You saw, if you don't keep your mouth shut, the same thing's going to happen to you. And she took her time, and maybe she'll get off a little bit early at some point. I don't know. But I've always wondered about that, because she has to probably have some good intel also.
Oh yeah, I mean, completely. And Ghislaine is not only a key figure in this with her relationship with Epstein, but Ghislaine's father, Robert Maxwell, who was this British publishing magnate. It came out at the end of his life after he died under mysterious circumstances himself. He fell off a boat and drowned, we're told. But it came out after the fact that he had belonged to Israeli intelligence his whole life, and that was something that he had denied until it was discovered after his death. And I think it would be too suspicious, frankly, if Ghislaine were to die after everything that's happened with Epstein. I think that this would go from a cold anger into a very hot one in terms of the international demand. But and I think that fact puts some limits on what can be done to contain her. But I think the fact that she is still alive and ostensibly will get out one day, or there could have been back channel agreements, and I'm just speculating here. But if I were, for example, the intelligence community in this situation, I would lean on the Justice Department to try to, propose something to her, that we're not going to touch your family, we're not going to touch your loved ones. If you keep your mouth shut on this, We will limit the disclosures that go forward publicly. You will still get to live on through your friends and family, and one day you'll have your freedom. Maybe 10 years from now, maybe whenever. But keep your mouth shut, play ball, and you'll have the best shot you can. And I think, given the discretion that they've had and the long links that both Epstein and Maxwell have had with the intelligence community their whole life, I would not be surprised if that's exactly what's happening with Maxwell, and that Maxwell is going to keep her mouth shut in order to see through some sort of back-channeled quasi plea deal.
Yeah, it might be speculation on your part, Mike, but it's speculation with a lot of knowledge and expertise behind it. So I think that's, I just said it very simply, but I think you really went into it in detail. I think that's exactly what happened with her. Keep your mouth shut. At least you'll have a life. Nobody will bother your family. Do your time. Get out and just don't be writing any books or anything like that, and you'll be okay. But I think you nailed it. And, I think you're exactly right with the Epstein case. People are still alive and they're still around. They're still doing things. Flip to JFK. Why, after all of these years, are they so hesitant in releasing the documentation? I had a theory. I think it's off now, though. I think beyond that, there's no question that the mob was involved in that, and we can get into that. But I said, you know what? The U.S. government would never want the world to know that a sitting president was able to be in an assassination or be, the plot of the American Mafia involved in it. I didn't even talk about the CIA. So I said that's one reason why they don't want any of this uncovered. But what do you think's behind this? I mean, at this point in time, I know Trump's ordering it. Who knows what papers really exist? Who knows what's been redacted? If we're ever going to get anything? What's your theory behind all of this?
Well, I actually thought that the declassifications that happened were tremendous, and um, I know that it was so many documents and so many little tidbits here and there that a lot of it got lost and not really consolidated into one sort of digestible public brownie to bite into. But I went through almost all of the documents that were uploaded over the course of several weeks, and I learned a tremendous amount about my own government coming into it, knowing a pretty tremendous amount. And so, to me, I thought they were tremendously brave, and there were many things that were redacted because Trump did a JFK files release in 2017. I mean, there's been pressure on this for so long, but even in the 2017 files, a ton was redacted. In this case, they actually unredacted everything from the files that were actually disclosed. And you can see why. I mean, I remember reading dozens of these documents and thinking, oh, I understand full well why this has been classified so long. I'll give you a couple examples. One of them is a 1961 memo from Arthur Schlesinger, the senior advisor at the White House, to JFK, and it was called CIA Reorganization. And it was a 15-page memo about why JFK had to confront the rogue CIA, how they had gone rogue, how they had usurped the foreign policy making function of the State Department. And it goes through very specific numbers about how deeply the CIA had penetrated both our own organizations and foreign governments. And for example, the State Department has something called the Political Affairs Branch. This is run under the Biden administration by Victoria Nuland at the State Department, who's a strange sort of figure in all this geopolitical intrigues these days. But the political section is involved in influencing political affairs in foreign countries all around the world. And what Schlesinger says to JFK in the memo is that about 75% of everyone who works in the State Department's political section are actually CIA employees or CIA agents working under State Department cover. And so in all the embassies, and he rattles them off, France, Algeria, Germany, a bunch of South American countries, and he gives a specific number. He says, I think total worldwide, there were about 4,000 people working in the political affairs branch of the State Department, and he gives that same equivalent number for CIA working as attachés, and And he goes on to describe how, through posing as State Department employees, the CIA has advanced knowledge of everything the State Department wants to do and can preempt them and can know exactly what they're doing in order to write their own foreign policy and also to monopolize contacts. He gives an example, for example, how in France, this was when there was a big issue around Charles de Gaulle and him trying to pull out of NATO in the 1960s, and there were multiple coup attempts against him, assassination plots against him. And he goes on to say that the CIA had monopolized contact with the leader of the French Parliament, and the CIA was blocking the U.S. ambassador and his team from actually accessing the CIA's assets on the ground. And they're all, and the files also name specific institutions. And getting back to this sort of organized crime network in the unions, in one of the files, the CIA is responding to a crisis media event where a publication had accused the CIA of infiltrating all of these different civil society institutions around Houston, all these different union groups, and the CIA wrote an internal memo effectively fact-checking the argument to report to the director how much of what they were accused of was actually true. And item by item, the whole thing was, there were one or two things that they said, well, this person didn't technically work for us, but they knew this guy, they worked with this guy who did work for us. But I'll give you an example. Like one of these was a group called the World Confederation of Organizations of the Teaching Profession, which was set up by the CIA in order to create contacts with other unions around the world in order to control the education systems, the universities, the public school system. And this was at a time when the CIA was in the middle of the Cold War, and they wanted to make sure that all of the schools were teaching the correct Cold War curriculum. And they were up against the New Left at the time, who was anti-Vietnam War. They were up against folks they thought were communist sympathizers. And so they set up this union. Both the president of the union and the executive secretary are directly working for the CIA. And they go out and they sponsor these conferences. They make contacts with all the other unions. They report back on their successes and their blocking points. Now, that organization is still around today. They've changed their name to Education International, but they're still around. And if you look at what they're doing all over the world, they are going up, they're basically campaigning against right-wing populism the same way they were working for the CIA, going against left-wing communism. They're going against Trumpism around the world. They're going after the AfD party in Germany, this Trump-aligned party in Germany. They're going after the Brexit movement in the UK. They're going after the Bolsonaro-type folks in Brazil. They're going after everyone that the CIA targeted as being Trump adjacent. But once you read those JFK files and you say, wait a second, this whole thing is a CIA shop, and they're still around. Now, how many other countries, when they read that, they say, well, hey, Education International is here in Germany with us. They're not actually a sort of bona fide teachers union. This thing is penetrated by the CIA and has been for 60 years. Maybe we should spy on them. Maybe our German intelligence should. Now, of course, in this case, they're not going to do that because the current in power party in Germany is aligned with that sort of Biden faction here. But the point is when you put the list of names out there and the list of institutions out there, the problem is when we report it to our own people, the whole rest of the world then knows about it. And this is why this whole thing has been shrouded by national security. You say, well, how does the world's most prolific, child sex trafficker get protected in the interests of national security? And again, but you have to look at it through that lens, which is that we do a lot of dirty deeds in order to keep the lights on, in order to keep oil cheap, in order to have export markets for Walmart, in order to be able to have, raw materials from aluminum to copper to lithium to cobalt. And in order to get that access, in order to get that control, we need to tap into a lot of very dark, unseemly forces, whether that be the mob, the unions, drug cartels. This is one of the issues, again, we're running into with the war on drugs here, is that oftentimes there's a war between the CIA and the DEA. The DEA has a mission to try to stop the drugs. And then the CIA steps in and says, well, actually, we have an overriding mission, which is to topple this government or to support this government. And the cartels are putting their muscle on the thumb for our guy. So don't go through with this drug bust. We saw this. I mean, can I tell one more story on this, which is
Sure,
just incredible?
absolutely.
There was an unbelievable showdown that happened about a month ago at a group called the U.S. Institute of Peace, which is a group that I've been fascinated by for a very long time. They are an adjunct of the State Department, and they were created by Congress in 1984 under Reagan. Their building is right next to the State Department. I walk by them every day on the way to work. They get over $50 million a year from the State Department every year, and they are involved on the ground with these institutions that the State Department and USAID funds, and they have a big role in these big conflict and drug zones in South America, in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, in Syria, and when the Taliban took over the geographic terrain of Afghanistan. If you remember, the Taliban tried to ban opium, or tried to ban the poppy production for heroin in the year 2000. Because the CIA had set up the drug trade in Afghanistan, taking the Golden Crescent high terrain to build the world's largest poppy field concentration, and then it grew that poppy, and then it laundered the proceeds from those drugs in order to fund the Mujahideen, which was a sort of Islamo-fascist terrorist group. It became Al-Qaeda and then ISIS later in its career. This is famously Osama bin Laden's origin story with the Mujahideen. Well, the Mujahideen, you can go back to the 1970s and read glowing profiles of Osama bin Laden as an Afghan, I think the title was Afghan Warrior on the Road to Peace, glowing profile pieces about bin Laden and the bin Laden family, who was very close to the Bushes, saying that, yes, this is a terrorist group, but they are freedom fighters because they're fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan. They were funded by this CIA drug supply, and we then protected that entire network. The Taliban in 2000 tried to shut that down, and they did. They took it from about 70% of the world's heroin supply to 0% of the world's heroin supply in about 18 months. We then invaded Afghanistan, reopened the heroin, and then it became 95% of the world's heroin supply from zero, all under U.S. military occupation. Then when the Taliban took back over in 2021, they tried to ban poppy. Who tried to stop them? The U.S. Institute of Peace, the U.S. State Department. They actually published a white paper that I published online. It's on my X feed if anyone wants to see it. And it's called Why the Taliban's Shutdown of Poppy is bad for Afghans and bad for the world, because it will have devastating negative economic consequences. Now, at the same time, the U.S. Institute of Peace was caught laundering tens of millions of dollars to the Taliban itself. So they were working with the Taliban, paying the Taliban, and instructing the Taliban to keep the drugs flowing. And so when U.S. Institute of Peace went through the reorganization under Doge and President Trump, they would not let the Trump administration officials into the building. They barricaded the doors. They tried to alter the digital documents to hide the financial records. They had to have the federal police come in and kick in the doors and throw everyone out of the building just so the new board could have meetings there. And so that's just one example, but you see this relationship between the drug traffickers and the organized crime elements, that's just in Afghanistan, and the U.S. government, and then directly calling to keep it open. And what do you think's happening at the Justice Department on the back end of that? Why do you think the Justice Department isn't throwing the book at that whole situation? Well, it's because for U.S. national security, would we have been able to have successfully toppled Bashar al-Assad in Syria if we didn't have a drug-funded narco-paramilitary network in Syria in order to fund that army and take over Syria and get rid of the CIA's enemy in Syria, that wouldn't have happened. We needed the drug trade, which means we needed the organized crime, which means we needed the Justice Department to look the other way in the interest of U.S. national security.
It's unbelievable, Mike. I don't even know what to say, how to respond to it. It's unbelievable. Hey, my friends, a lot of you already know that just a few short months ago, I started my private community. We call it the Franzese family. And I got to be honest, I'm really blessed to see that over 500 people have already become a part of it. You know what they're doing? They're connecting with one another, they're learning, and they're growing together basically every single day. So don't wait. Take part in growing yourself in the Franzese family, and don't miss both the benefits and the success that come from a real community environment. Go to michaelfranzese.com/family or click the link in the description below to sign up. And I hope to see you all there, because you're going to see a lot of me. I do a lot in that community. It's going to be a legacy piece for me. I just love helping people. So that's an offer you shouldn't refuse, people. See you in there. Let me ask you this. You know, then is it fair to say, you always hear that companies like Blackstone that, you know, controls or manages trillions of the world's dollars, you know, do they have tremendous influence over the CIA and some of these, you know, dark organizations? They must. There's no
Oh my
question.
God. Well, everyone can go to my X feed. I just posted this yesterday. I'll tell you a funny story on that. Um, if you know the name Tom Donilon is the chairman of BlackRock Investment Institute. This is BlackRock's internal think tank and global influence shop, who basically back channels with politicians and hosts events and does the sort of internal brain of BlackRock. Its chair is a man named Tom Donilon. Tom Donilon won the CIA Directors Award. He was the National Security Advisor, the top official in all things intelligence, military, and statecraft for Barack Obama. He ran the White House transition for Obama for the U.S. State Department. He's won the State Department Distinguished Medal Award, the Office of Director of National Intelligence Distinguished Medal Award. He won the Department of Defense Distinguished Medal Award. He won the CIA Directors Award. He was Joe Biden's top pick to run the CIA. And before Bill Burns was asked to run the CIA, Joe Biden personally asked Tom Donilon to run the CIA, but Tom Donilon said, no, actually, I'm going to keep my job at BlackRock instead. You make a lot more money at BlackRock than you do at the CIA. But this is the guy who's in charge of BlackRock's internal brain, who was the senior intelligence figure, the guy on top of the entire intelligence community, and was personally asked by Joe Biden to run the CIA. So yes, the fact is this is what I call the blob to banker pipeline. Every senior figure in the blob, they used to go into things like academia. They'd go and be a professor, or they'd go and, they'd be a public speaker, or they'd go and write books. Now they all go into hedge funds, private equity funds, and these big financial firms, because that, it turns out, is the best way to know where the market is going. If you're a company like BlackRock and you have an equity investment in basically every company on the NASDAQ, in the S&P, in the Dow, then you do your investing on the basis of these macroeconomic forecasts that depend heavily on what the U.S. government is going to do to an industry or to a region. So, for example, if you know the oil is going to open up in Crimea, if you know the CIA is going to go in and ensure that this leader in Romania doesn't rise to power, so NATO is going to be able to build its giant base right there on the Black Sea. If you know that the Pentagon is going to spend $100 billion of taxpayer money to reconquer the Donbass, so all of the shale in Eastern Europe there is going to open up and we'll be able to exploit that, you know whether to bet on an oil and gas company in Ukraine. You also know what's going to happen to the entire liquefied natural gas market. If you know what the CIA is going to do in sub-Saharan Africa, or what the special forces are going to do, there with respect to the gold deposits, the lithium, the cobalt, the aluminum, the copper, you know whether to bet on mining companies there. If you know that the CIA is going to try to force reforms around green energy and renewable energy supplies in a particular region, you know what to bet on in the energy market. So it's the ultimate form of insider trading. This is why Mark Milley, for example, who was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is now working at J.P. Morgan. And you have you have the same thing. Jared Cohen from the State Department's policy planning staff is now at Goldman Sachs, doing the sort of macroeconomic, futures analysis there, because they have a Rolodex. They know everyone at CIA, Pentagon. They can call their friends and know what's going to happen 3 months, 6 months, 2 years from now, and they can then relay that back to the banks. And now they have effectively insider trading. They can skate to where the puck is going because they're getting information that no civilian betting at the retail level of the market can have access to. So this is why the banks all bid, and BlackRock, they all bid on senior national security and intelligence officials when they leave office now.
Wow. And I guess that same information at times can be given back to members of Congress who have those relationships also. And there's the insider trading.
Can I make two quick notes on
Sure.
this, by the way? Is
Sure.
Tom Donilon has two brothers. One of them is Mike Donilon, who was the senior advisor to Joe Biden for 40 years of his career. He was the top White House advisor to Joe Biden, Mike Donilon, while his brother is the chairman of the BlackRock Investment Institute. So even if Tom Donilon isn't talking directly to Joe Biden about what the White House and the Pentagon and the CIA are going to do, his brother knows, because he's the top advisor to the White House. His brother tells his brother, now BlackRock knows everything that's going on. And, the other aspect, the other brother that Tom Donilon has is the communications director for the Archdiocese of Boston, which is its own funny network. When you look at the Biden, the Biden family was very close with Whitey Bulger's, whole network, and James Bulger and those folks. And of course, the Whitey Bulger crime family in Boston was obviously a mafia network that was protected by the FBI for something like 30 years.
Yes, that's a fact, without a doubt. This is fascinating, Mike. I got to tell you. Let me ask you this.
My friends, if you want to hear the rest of this eye-opening interview, join my school community. Link is in the description. Okay, my friends, well, there you have it. It's fascinating to me, people. I mean, I know, there's certain forces at work behind all governments, wherever they might be, and listen, you might have a constitutional republic or you might be in a democracy, but there's people with money and power. I don't want to say that of pulling the strings, but have a lot of influence, no doubt about it, not only in our country, but internationally, everywhere. You get a company like BlackRock that's got trillions of dollars that they manage. Well, obviously, they have influence, people in power. They listen to these people. They have influence over them. They get things done. So we'll never get to the bottom of it. We'll never know. It's too much of a complicated network and too, in depth. But, there is a deep state working internationally, no question about it. So I thought he shed light on a couple of things. The Epstein matter, no question. He doesn't believe that Epstein was committed suicide. He believes he was murdered. I can tell you almost for a fact that he was, because I was in that cell. I know exactly what the situation is there in that prison, not even a prison, a jail. And I think Mike, shed some light on that too. So, it's amazing the things that we learn, people. And it's great when you have somebody like Mike that's willing to talk. And we need to hear from people like this. We always have to be suspicious. You never really take things at face value when it comes to government or it comes to international workings. There's always something going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of. But you know what? You can only worry about things that you have control of, people. Things that you don't have control of, you let it be, and you do the best you can to weed through it and get through it and navigate the course. That's what I believe. So, hope you enjoy it. We always try to bring you guests that are, both entertaining, informative. We try to give you good content, and I think Mike certainly fits into that category. So, that's it for today, my friends. How do I always leave you? Same way, never going to change. Be safe. You know the deal there. Be healthy. Again, you know the deal there. And yes, God bless each and every one of you, your family, your friends, your communities, and God bless America. See you next time.